Coach Dan and Greg, welcome to the show.
Hi. Hey.
I'm glad you guys are here, and I'm so grateful we finally got to meet at the United Coaches Convention. And Dan and Greg are the head and assistant coach at Johns Hopkins University. And sadly, I didn't get to play for them, but as an alumni, I've been watching from afar and keeping tabs, and their team won the national championship this year. So do you guys still feel like it's sinking in, or how do you feel about it?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'll admit this. I rewatched the game 2 days ago, like start to finish. I don't know. It was like real I stayed up till like midnight. I don't know what I was doing. I just was This is one of those things. But I mean, for us, it hasn't. I mean, I'll speak for myself and Greg can pipe in, but it hasn't really worn off. But the beginning of it was so energetic and there's so much energy behind it. That has faded a little bit now that we're back into the swing of some other things, but it's still awesome to watching it 2 days ago. I was just like, oh yeah, that, because I know what happens, but like I'm watching the game and just relive it again. It's pretty awesome.
Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the excitement was such an overwhelming thing as it was happening in the days after. It was cool, but actually, we were just recruiting in Philly this past weekend and getting the congratulatory, remarks from our colleagues was really nice, and it kind of brings you back to thinking about some of those moments. So it's a nice reminder for sure. But we're looking forward now too.
Yeah, I remember when we had a conversation at the convention. I was like, "Oh my gosh, congrats. That was so awesome." And you guys were so humble. You're like, "Yeah, we tried, we did okay." And I love that, and I feel like that's always been a part of the team culture, is that humbleness, but also being hungry at the same time. So let's go back to the start of the season before we knew what was about to unfold. So what was your focus going into the preseason, and did you change anything this year? So Dan, if you just want to kick this off.
Yeah, sure. Well, we try to approach each year as its own kind of entity, because I think every year is unique because you have a new set of players joining the team, the identity of the team. You hope that the core of what you're doing stays from year to year, but each year, for us, should be approached in that way, which is, how do we feel as a group? What are our goals? How do we want to accomplish those things? And a lot of those real common things that I think a lot of teams do. Um, we knew going into this year that we'll have a really good roster, that we'll have a lot of quality. The challenges for us is we did bring in a good sized freshman class, and then we brought in a fair number of grad students. So we really are operating with five classes, not four. And so for us, the element of that brings some really awesome advantages because we can, in terms of the grad students, tap into a lot of their experience and tap into their leadership from some of the other places they've been. So there's a lot of advantages to that, but there's also challenges to that. And so anytime new players come in, you have to have a returning group that really buys into the mission and the goals for what we're trying to do, and combine that with the new players. And so we spent a fair amount of time in preseason, which we do a lot of, but I would say we did more of how do we form what the new identity of this group's going to be? What do you guys want to accomplish? And and one of the things they put on the list right away was like, we want to win the whole thing, and we want to win the conference because we didn't last year, and and some of those goals. But then also, how do we want to operate in light of knowing that we want to do these big things? And I think the two words you used, although we don't use those exact words, I think those are concepts we use a lot, which is like the humility of what we try to do, but then also the hunger and the drive of what we have to do to get to those points. And so spent a lot of time as a group, full group, small group, and otherwise, trying to tap into what that means for the whole team, but also what it means for each person as they do their self work to help the team kind of grow and go through those phases. And then as this season went on, we added a few new things that basically just added to the idea of what does recognition mean and how do we incorporate that more. And maybe I don't know how much you did some of these, but I think even as alumni, I know like when we came in, there were certain things they called it for the good of the team. I don't know. Did you guys do some of that, Erica? I don't know, but we kept that idea of okay, how do you do more for each other, and how does that affect the team? So we kept some of those moments. So we would share some of those moments before practice, after practice, in meetings, and all that, which I think was happening before. But then we added another thing we called one percenters. And so essentially at the end of every practice, people would call out other people's performance, like within practice. And it could be from an athletic standpoint, but it also a lot of times had nothing to do with like a goal they scored. It had to do with like how encouraging someone was, how hard they were working. And so trying to tap into the element of connection between people by the recognition that they give, like we give them as coaches, but also that they give one themselves. Sorry, I'm going on a huge. I give long answers. I'm sorry, and I will let Greg talk. But anyway, what do you think that we did differently, or maybe just emphasizing some of the things we do?
Yeah, no, I think that, obviously before the season as coaches, you try to do as much homework as you can to understand the types of players that you have returning, obviously, but also the players that are coming in. And we had such a big group, like Dan mentioned, it was really like having two freshman classes or two new classes in a way. So a lot of the work that we did during the preseason period and throughout the season, frankly, was trying to figure out different ways to how we can incorporate this class, because we had players that were 18 all the way up to 22. And what we found, and one of the coolest things that I saw throughout the year is how the freshmen even connected with the graduate students, which was really fun. I think if you go on our Instagram and you look at the vlog, like right in the middle, you'll see two freshmen actually tackling a grad student onto their bed when we were at the Final Four. And those small moments are like fun and cool, but that doesn't come without, them creating some really cool bonds throughout the year. So that was something I was really proud of that we helped facilitate, but ultimately the team just did an amazing job with this year.
Yeah.
I love that. And guys, don't worry about talking too much, because I don't like to talk too much on my own podcast because you're the guest. So I definitely want you to get into as much detail as you can. But one thing I really appreciate about the Hopkins program, and it's been this way for a while, is just the focus on that team culture. And when I was there, we had a big roster. I think we had like 34. And how many do you guys have currently?
We had 36 this year. Yeah.
So it's tough to get 36 young women to get along and be that all in and supportive of each other. So how did you guys navigate that, and why is team culture so pivotal to the success of the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you're unknowingly using some of our tag words, because one of the phrases that we use, so each year we have our seniors say, we give them kind of the project of, okay, we want you to come up with a phrase that encapsulates who we are and what we're going through this particular time and this particular year. And so last year, the phrase that they used was all in, all out, which is what you just said when you said all in. So so that's some of the things that we try to do. I think that team cohesion can be just putting a bunch of people in a room and saying, let's see how this goes. And I think that can go real right at times, but it also can go wrong, and it also can divide people, or at least create cliques within a team. And so we have a real purposeful set of core values that we not only talk about and share, but try to use as a roadmap for what and how they interact with one another, and what and how they want to be within their career. And so I've always been really fascinated by that whole idea of how does a group become better and stronger together. And how do you do that and break that down into smaller parts? And so it's a really big emphasis for us. And I think, you know, for recruits, the common question we get is like, what is your team chemistry, and what's the culture like? And that's become, I think, more primary to a lot of people's search, which I think is a good thing. I don't know that they always, as a recruit, get a clear picture of it until they maybe arrive at that place. But for us, it all comes down to the people and how they interact with each other. And as you said, like with larger rosters, there are hardships that happen throughout the year, and there are rewards that happen for certain players and maybe not others. And how do players individually kind of deal with those moments? How do they deal with it within teammates? How do they communicate with us as coaches? And how do they find a path that's best suited for them to have a positive experience? Because at the end of the day, what Greg and I want, and Jen, who's not here, our other assistant, want, is that they all have a positive experience. But that doesn't mean they all have the same experience by any means. And so I think, putting an emphasis on it, one, but also making sure that we believe and the team believes that the process of team culture is over time, and that it's a work in progress, and it's a work in progress really every day, because it comes from not only how do they react and how do they act when they're in front of us as coaches, but also, probably more importantly, how do they act and react when they're not in front of us and when they're just together, like off the field, on the field, whatever it might be. But um, how do they want to be as a person, and how do they want our program to be overall? And so I think some of those initiatives we have, like giving them ownership over things, I really like giving our players autonomy so that they have ideas that they say, I kind of want to incorporate this and I want to check in with the coaches, but I know that they're going to give me, you know, enough freedom to be able to work through this. And I felt like this year, a little bit more than last year, that they kind of took the ball and rolled with it a little bit more. In, say, as an example, the captains and the seniors meeting with the entire team on said Tuesday of the next week, and they come to us and they're like, "We want to meet with the team. We want to talk about a couple things," and they don't tell us anything that they're going to say. So I have to have, you know, we have to have faith and trust in them, and they have to also have faith and trust in us that we're going in the right path. And of course, they always knock it out of the park. And honestly, a lot of those meetings are more impactful than anything that Greg or I would say. But I think that's where the deep meaning of cohesion comes from, is how do the players lead one another, not just the captains, but how do the players lead one another, and how do they find their voice within the things that we do?
Greg, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it like Dan said, it is the most common question we get when we are on phone calls or at camps. And you know, I think it's something that, you know, we can talk all day about. We love our culture and we love what we're building, but it's such a hard thing to verbalize, because like Dan said, it's an actionable thing. You can't just, you know, this is our statement, this is what our culture is going to be, and just kind of read it as it is. So I think the thing that we tell, at least what I tell our potential student athletes, is that you really just have to come and be around our women, because they are incredible and they have such a high level of ambition, but also such a high level of emotional intelligence. When you put those two together with the motivation that they just intrinsically have, it's such a great recipe for success, for not just, you know, soccer, but anything they want to be great at, which is everything, really. So I mean, I think you know, getting players here to just talk with them, go to lunch with them, you know, attend a camp, and, you know, pull them aside and ask them what it really is like, because we can talk and say as many great things as we want to, but until they actually experience it, they don't really know the feeling, because it's such a hard thing to describe. But I think our women just do such an amazing job, and they're just such an amazing, you know, outlet for what we want to be. It makes our jobs easy, because there's that trust there from, you know, obviously from the newest players all the way to our most senior players. And going back to your original question about the success, I think our senior class this year really made a decision to make this a special year. And throughout, the various decisions with the captains, I think our seniors had a huge part to play in that amount of success that we had both on the field, but certainly off the field too.
Let's talk about a few other things about your success this season, especially when we get into those playoff games. What were some other things that you think just pushed you guys over the edge, especially in those closer games towards the end?
Yeah, I mean, so our season, which I know you followed it, so anyone that followed it really closely was, um, there were different challenges throughout the season. So you look at the beginning of the season, whereas a lot of our non-conference games, so we're playing some top 10, top 5 teams. So there's challenges within that. And then you move into the conference, which there we did had a really great conference competition schedule. So we scored a lot and we didn't give up much and so on. But each one of those games was very unique because each of those teams, almost all those teams, we schemed and they did something completely different. And so, and they did that because, of course, I think they were a little to a lot concerned about staying in the game and trying to compete with us, which is, like we do the same thing. Like, how do we put our best foot forward? But what it prepared us for was the kind of unknown of, okay, this is what we're going to prepare for, but here's what they're throwing at us. So we have to pivot fast. And then you start to move into playoffs, and then you start to move into the tournament. And the tournament was a little less of that. I would say Williams threw something at us slightly differently, but most of the teams played us a little more as they had other teams. But the difference with our success with those teams was that we were more prepared for kind of the unexpected, and the training sessions leading up to those moments stayed really high. So even though we were winning, like we averaged 4 goals a game, like we were scoring a lot, and games were put away sometimes somewhat early in the 90. And so preparing ourselves for those bigger games later in the year became a really important element of what happened in practice. And so going back to Greg's point, like our seniors and a lot of those players understood that element and understood like we have to bring it every day, because if we don't, our level is not going to be prepared for someone that's going to just give us everything they have, and that might be a touch more athletic or a touch more skilled, or they're going to have, all those teams have one or two or maybe three really really good attacking players that can hurt us. And so because of the nature of our preparation and because of the nature of our returners, and I'll be honest, like, you look at the title game, and even leading up to it, there's a lot of players on the field, and they certainly helped us win that thing, but equally so is everyone that prepared them for those moments. And that all happened in training. And so fortunately, the buy-in was as high as it was, that we were creating as many of those stressful moments as we could, because the matchup against people that were playing in training was preparing them for those things. So there was variety, and there was a kind of a dynamic flow to what the season brought us, but at the end of the day it took everybody.
Greg, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a huge huge secret. I don't have a ton to add on that one. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that we talked about, just keeping training consistently high, and I think the team did an amazing job of that this year. As a coach, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, that we don't generally have to coach motivation like maybe sometimes that we've had to do at other places we've coached, perhaps. So, I mean, not to say we don't motivate our players, we certainly do, but so much of that comes from within, to continue the saying. But yeah, I think they just brought so much energy every day, regardless of what they were doing, academic course load, extracurricular activities, things like that. The standard just stayed so high on a consistent basis that when things got more difficult, we're playing back-to-back games, they had it within them to just kind of keep going. And the maturity level that comes along with that too is a lot to be said for them too.
One thing I also noticed in those playoff games was just the level of athleticism the team had. And as a performance coach, that's really exciting to watch, and just seeing those 1 to 2 steps ahead of the opponent. And I'm just wondering if you guys had an extra focus on speed and strength preparation before the season. Did you maintain with the performance coach in season? And was there any extra focus there this time around?
Yeah. You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we're still continuing to work on is the relationship between the coaching staff and the other support staff, whether it be the athletic training staff or the sport performance staff. I think this year we got to a really, really good place and a high level of trust. Not that we didn't have it before, but we just starting to understand how each of us tick a little bit, just like any other coaching relationship. But I think the level of trust that we had in Liz and Amari, to kind of periodize things and schedule things when we needed it, was paramount, because we finally had enough data with the GPS systems that we use and the types of tracking that we do through practices and games. We could be really specific, with certain players or with certain position groups, that really allowed us to maximize as much as we could given the data that we had, to make sure that everyone was kind of firing on all cylinders. And so I think we were trying to do that years previous, but we just didn't have enough data quite, accumulated yet. But this year, I think we got in a good routine. Amari was a lot more comfortable with the team. They love him. And then Liz was right there to make sure that everything from a wellness standpoint was as a really high level too. So I think it was a culmination of the three things: the coaching, the sport performance, and kind of the wellness side that helped us kind of elevate this year.
Yeah, the one thing that we try to do each year, which we're doing right now, is to do a deep dive on, like, how did it go? Not just how many games did you win, but what part of the system and structure is working and what part needs to be fine tuned. And I think if we're doing it right, it means we have to fine tune every year. I mean, regardless of, you look at, winning the national championship doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can still improve on. And so last year, what we found is late in the year, some of our positions, and this is not anything against the players, it was more of the system in place. Some of our players' fitness level wasn't high enough. And I started thinking about, like, what is going on? Like, we Amari's working with them, we're working with them. Why is this happening? And so it came down to a couple things. Number one, they don't sleep enough, so the recovery is a problem. So we put more emphasis on the wellness checks. So we started being much more deliberate about getting information from them daily about how they're feeling, how many hours are they sleeping, so we can kind of at least navigate that recovery phase a little bit better. And number two, probably the bigger one, was that within the context of training, especially when we're doing functional training, so functional being like some topic that applies to something within the game, potentially even some position that's focusing on some position, central mid, a winger, whatever. So the bigger functional training there is, the more inherent that certain positions don't run as much. So for example, like if you're doing anything bigger than sevens, a holding mid or a center back doesn't run as much because they don't need to run as much, especially if there's less transition with the center backs, because they're just not defending as much. Let's say you're working with a group that's keeping the ball a lot. Those three players or two positions are going to be standing and jogging more than, say, a winger, or more than, right? It all makes sense, right? But we found that if we needed a player, because ultimately what we need by the end of the year is, like, any player on the roster needs to be able to play 90 minutes. And if they can't play 90 minutes, why can't they? Right? So from a physical standpoint. So can we call on them to make sure that this can happen? And so So our center mids weren't as fit later in the year last year. But again, it wasn't from lack of effort or lack of working hard in practice. It has nothing to do with that. It was just the system in place. So what we did as a reflection of need is we started to add different elements to what Amari did. So he kind of ramped up his intensity. So he works with the team in the fall on Mondays and Thursdays. So Monday he works with the team prior to a practice. And so I was concerned mostly because of people that I've worked in the past at other places that he would actually overwork them before practice, therein creating elements of more injury, creating elements of that they're just too tired to train. And so he went a little lower, mostly because of when I was telling him last year, well, we ramped that up into a better space, and he individualized that among those kind of groups based on what Greg was saying, like that GPS data and all that stuff. So he was using that those technologies to help us on Mondays, and on Thursdays he individualized things even more and made, let's say, someone that didn't play a lot in that Wednesday game, their workouts were considerably harder and had a little bit more of the cardio and speed endurance kind of stuff in them, as opposed to just the lifting part. So he combined a little bit more of that. So that really helped. And then the other thing we did was weekly, or we'll use sometimes twice a week, but at least weekly, we would throw in sprint conditioning workouts. So we would throw in like fast 10 to 15 minutes at the most, probably usually only like 10 minutes of some kind of fun, like tried to make it fun. I hope it was fun, like relay races and like stuff that they were competing against each other. So it wasn't just like get on the line and sprint, get on the line, sprint, like get on the line and sprint, but chase that person, do this, like try to make it those environments where it was kind of motivating for them too. And that helped a lot too. So then what we found, so now going to the deep dive of this year, what we found is that the highest end of what we needed from a physical standpoint, which is our wingers, some of them weren't quite to that. Like I can run at this level for 30 minutes, 35 minutes, no question. Some of them were close to that, but not quite. So we need to tweak it a little bit more to kind of now we brought the base of everyone up so that the whole group is I feel a lot more fit towards the end of the year. But now we've got to fine tune like those high volume sprint positions and start working on those a little bit differently too. So point being, like, we have to look at this as a full staff, and we need everyone's input, from Amari working with our girls to Liz in athletic training, like Greg said, and putting all that together to make it so that it all makes sense, and so that it's not and because we're really fortunate here that we have the extensive amount of staff that we do, so that we can handle this in different forms, and we don't have to take necessarily a lot of practice in some cases to do that.
That's brilliant, and it's so critical to have those players who aren't playing as many minutes to be able to get as much load as that starting lineup. And I did see that in the playoff games when there were girls coming off the bench with as much energy, if not more, and they were fast, they were explosive, they were conditioned, and they came into the game and made a difference. And that I definitely saw that within those games. Now we're about halfway through. Let's shift to recruiting. I know you guys are kind of in your recruiting season and getting out to some showcases. And I get a lot of questions about Division III programs and what you guys are looking for in your players. And I know you touched on the character aspect and how a lot of your girls are very intrinsically motivated, they're passionate, they're driven. What are some other things you are looking for in recruits for Johns Hopkins?
Well, generally we're looking for the three main areas, which academically, so are they a good fit on their interest level, are they a good fit on our level in terms of being part of a world-class institution that's quite frankly very competitive to get in, but also very competitive when you're here in terms of the drive and the motivation that you need to have as a student. So there's one. The second thing is we're looking for what type of person it is. So back to the character piece, because we want to really invest in people, and we know that coming and being part of Johns Hopkins means that they're likely not leaving. Our retention rate is 98%. And so we know that a big part of how they're going to interact with what we are doing within the team and then across campus generally is what kind of person are they? Because every one of them is going to go through something really hard through their years, and maybe every year. Each one of those might be a little bit different, but the thing that will get them through that is their character and how do they handle moments. And it doesn't mean by any means they need to be perfect. In fact, we hate that word because I think it just doesn't make any sense to me. But the idea of what does growth mean and who do they want to be and who do they want to become. So character is a big part. And then the third one is what is their level of play is from a competitive standpoint. And we look at all three of those things in multiple areas. We definitely go to events. So we'll Greg, like he said, he was just in Philly. A lot of the events, there's national events for ECNL, for GA, but then otherwise non-ECNL or non-GA events, we're seeing those as well. I would say that that's the most natural environment for a player because they're with their friends, they're with their teammates that they know, they're with the system they know. So it's important that we see them in that environment. We also have camp settings, which we have our own camps. For us, our camps, we try to make kind of a unique experience. I know there's a lot of different ways to run a camp. We have many of our current players help us with camp so that they get an idea of who that person is on both sides. Like our players get to meet recruits and the recruits get to meet our players. They hear their story and their voice of not only what they're going through now as Hopkins players, but also their path to get there, which I think is really important. For us, it's, our camps, we get to train the campers and we get to see how they react to kind of hard things. And do they fight through those quickly? Do they want that kind of challenge? They get to see what Greg and I, how we actually coach. I think it's very interactive, and it's not settings where we want to just throw them into camp and just like watch them play for 2 days. That's not what we're after. And then of course watch them play still. So we've got those training sessions into interactions with our players, and then watch them play not only in 11s but also in like 77 kind of environments. So those are kind of the avenues that are most common for us. And over the course of time, we get an idea of at what level do they fit into all three of those areas that we look for. And our advice always is to make sure that recruits are getting themselves out there, that they have a good support system. So before we started recording, you said that people were talking to you about talking to us. That's important. Like that's important that they have people that they trust on their end that can lead them in a direction that makes sense, but that also might be connected to us really closely, like you are, or more generally. And we get a massive amount of interest. I mean, Greg can attest to the number of emails that we get.
How many is it?
Well, depend. I mean, so I went to the beach with my wife and my 2 kids the last 3 days, and I came back to over about 150 emails just from those couple days.
Wow.
That is maybe slightly elevated because there was a showcase the weekend before, but that's pretty standard. So if I haven't replied to your email and you're watching this right now, I'm getting back to you, I promise. But it does take me a while because I do try to obviously read everyone and respond in an informational way at the least. But yeah, it's amazing, honestly. I mean, I think as coaches, we want interest. We want, students to be interested in our school and our product. And I think that due to a lot of the success that we had this year, and obviously in past years, there's a lot of interest from an athletic standpoint. And then the academic piece, as Dan said, it's just truly world class. So we do get a lot of interest, and that's exciting for us. But it does take some time to kind of figure out what the best avenue is for communication, but then also when we can see them and give them some transparent feedback. It does take some time, but it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add too, we're looking for, like you mentioned, like bigger rosters and so on. We're working on getting our roster a little bit smaller, and so I think the 28 to 32 range is kind of a target. I think we maybe do that, maybe not next year, but in the coming years. And with that, our classes are generally between about 6 and 8, maybe 9. So that gets us to those numbers. And sometimes, we have to say no to some really great people and great players, not because they can't or couldn't play for us, but because that spot is taken already. And we're not in a position, or we don't want to be in a position where we are bringing in so many people that it's not helpful for the current team. And so I think that can be really confusing for recruits. I think the line of, are they telling me that I'm not good enough? Or are they telling me like there's just no spot? And so we try to be as clear as we can about that. And sometimes there are recruits we have that might be playing at a little higher level than others, and we're really transparent about that. But sometimes it just comes down to some of those spots are a bit more open than some other spots. Generally we try to get 2 per line, so 2 backs, 2 mids, 2 forwards, and a goalie. But sometimes there might be an extra 1 or 2 in there, and maybe it's not going to be another defender that year. So it doesn't mean that third defender that we're saying no to couldn't play for us. It's just that we don't have a spot there. And I think that is common in certain places. Every program recruits slightly differently. There's certainly similarities across, but getting to know what each of those coaching staffs want and how they operate is part of that recruiting process and part of those conversations you might have with them. But as it relates to us, we want to be as fair and transparent each time so that they know, okay, here's what I can expect from this experience as best that we can describe it as coaches. And then also here's what we can expect from you. Like, you're showing what kind of person you are. This is what we expect you to be, and then grow from there too. So I think the reciprocal interest is really important, and the reciprocal energy back and forth is also really important.
I'm glad you brought that up. I always tell players looking at colleges that sometimes it's not personal, but it's personnel and what the coaching staff is looking for and the positions that they need filled. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, I want to come back to one thing you mentioned earlier about how you've been attending non-ECNL and non-GA showcases. And I think a big misconception with college recruiting is you have to be on ECNL. It's make or break. You have to be on the best team. Can you talk about why you guys are attending all these other showcases? And do you have any numbers of like how many girls are on the roster now who played ECNL versus who didn't?
Maybe exactly. It is, well, this landscape is changing, as you know. I think ECNL and GA are both, well, especially ECNL has grown tremendously. So the number of ECNL players that we've had entering our program is higher than what it was before, for sure, just from the nature of those leagues changing. The reason that we want to look at any team, ECNL, non-ECNL, whatever it is to find the right person. And sometimes for that particular person and their area, or maybe they're too far away from an ECNL team. I mean, traveling an hour and a half to train is not realistic for some people every 4 times a week. And so being part of the club that they're part of at times isn't even their decision. It's just because of where they are. And so there are players that can help us, that can help lots of programs across the whole country that play on lots of different teams. And so we have success stories. We have an All-American that didn't play for an ECNL team. So it's silly for us to say, okay, they have to be on this team or that team. It's just not, it's not good business, so to speak. That said, we do want to see them in as competitive an environment as possible for as many times as they can be in those environments as possible, because that only hones their skills so that when they get to us, that they're a little bit more ready. So someone that may not have access to maybe some of those higher level things, if we're talking to some of those players, they may be supplementing some other kind of training, some other kind of things to get some of that kind of level prior to entering college. When it comes to our camps, we have everyone mixed together. So it's like, can you play better than that person? Can you outduel her? Can you outduel her? Can your level be a little higher? And the biggest challenge with us is recruiting is a really strange thing, because we're really looking into the future, because we really don't know exactly what a player is going to do when they get to college. Nobody knows. And so how we look at the environments that they say gives us at least glimpses into that. So we anticipate, like, she can raise her level when it comes to this. That matchup was a little easier because we know this team, or we know that particular player. Like if it's at a camp, that was a little harder for her, so on and so forth. So like even within camp settings, we'll flip things around a little bit and we're like, okay, we want to see her in a different position, and we want to see her matched up against this person because we're really familiar with her, but not as familiar with her. Does she rise up or does she disappear? And it happens one way or the other. And so that has nothing to do really with what team they play on. It has everything to do with, can they hang, and can they handle those environments and maybe even have a bigger upside. We have players every year that surprise us, and I think even players they go through things that surprise them, that affect how they actually, when they get into the college game. And one of them can be they're homesick. I mean, that is an underrepresented thing, that they get to college, they're from, we get students from everywhere, and it just hits them like a train. And they didn't anticipate that. We didn't anticipate that. Like, working through it's important, but you never quite know how they're gonna deal with those moments. And so I think as we help them through that, we're also have tried our best to anticipate as recruiting whether they have the character to do that. So as an example, like homesick freshman, we knew her really well. We knew she would power through it because we knew her really well from recruiting. So we're like, you're going to be fine. And we know you're going to be fine because we know what we've seen from you previously. And so I think those glimpses in that case really helped us and helped her at the end. At any rate, I don't know if there's fill into that.
I think going back to the general question, like, we want to find the best players. I mean, I think wherever we need to go to do that, that's where we'll go, whether it's ECNL, GA, National League, E64, like whatever they are. A team down the street who we've never heard of. There might be a player who just moved in. I mean, like Dan said, one of our All-Americans, didn't play ECNL or GA. The other one didn't play ECNL because their team was still in kind of elevation and promotion, right, into the ECNL. So she was actually playing on an RL team, and she was amazing this year for us. So we don't care where they come from, as long as they have the character piece. They're gonna succeed at the school, and they can help us be successful in the field too.
So I just thought of two things.
One more
one
more thing.
One is I do think that if you are listening to this and you're on a non-ECNL team, and you have coaches that are not seeing you as much, camps become more important. Just inherently, they become more important. So you have to understand that. Like there are certain tournaments that are non-ECNL that are less attended by us and just generally. So you can approach that in one of two ways. Like you're gonna probably be going to those tournaments regardless if this fits with what your team. So you have to make up that deficit somewhere else. And so our camps in the summer have multiple colleges. During the school year, they just have our staff. So there are multiple schools that do this differently. You can go to camps early in your search that have multiple schools there. Some of them are like a free for all, like they're colleges all over the place, like different levels, totally different schools. Some are a little bit more fine tuned to say these are high academic schools only, different divisions, and so on. So you got to do your homework a little bit for that setting. So that's one thing. The second thing, we, like Greg said, we will go anywhere. So one of the things that became really apparent to us is that we do recruit all over the country, right? And in California and the West Coast and along there, it is a long way for those people to travel for a camp of ours. Typically, our camps are only 2 days long, so that's a big investment of time. It's a big investment of money and so on. So we started actually doing satellite camps in California, and we've done one in Northern California for the last 2 years. We'll be doing one in Southern California also this year. So it's in June, and we basically go there and we go closer to them and just show up at a field. And it's been really successful. And the camp isn't huge, so we get to interact with them. But the reason we're doing that is because we want to go where people can have a little better access to us instead of always thinking, you got to come to us, you got to come to us. That will fill in some of that void too. So if you're a West Coast, like they're never going to see me. I don't play any CNL. I don't play. They're never going to see me. Those settings could be really helpful for you too. And this is generally like any other camps, but as it relates to us, that those are a reflection of that need.
That's great to hear. I didn't know that that was happening, and it reminds me of just like that pop-up concept. So I think that's really cool for everyone to have more access. Now, my last question with recruiting is the academic side. So you guys say you're looking for the best players, but sometimes the best players don't meet the academic requirements of Johns Hopkins. When I got recruited, thankfully they weren't as strict. I don't think I would have gotten in with my SAT. But what are some of the requirements today for all the recruits?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it absolutely is our biggest asset in that it's a world-class institution, lots of interest, and people know about us. So there's the asset and there's the motivation for a lot of people. It also is our biggest challenge because, like you said, there are players that could absolutely help us win national championships, that the standard is so high. Our acceptance rate is very low. And so a big part of what we do is to vet those players and get an idea of what their academic record is and so on. So admissions does give us some guidelines. So for SAT, they go off of the middle 50, which represents the middle 50% of previously accepted classes. So that cohort, and then they give us guidelines to say, when you're recruiting, look for scores within this range. And so for the SAT, it's 1510 to 1540. That's the middle 50. And then for ACT, it's 34 or 35. So, very good scores, and so we also are test optional. So that is an option for players as they're looking at us too. So, I mean, of course, when you look at the full academic profile, the full part of that includes testing, right? So if you're not including testing, you are leaving out a part of what could potentially help you. But again, that is completely up to that particular family and that particular recruit. And we've had players be accepted and that have come in test optional. We've had players come in with tests. I would say it's more common with tests so far. But it is a challenge for us to not as we start to narrow our list, which is kind of what's happening right now, is the winter into the summer is when the list starts to kind of narrow a bit more. I think that generally happens with recruits' timelines too. Um, those that are really motivated and really want Hopkins, they will wait into the summer. Some cannot do that because Division One programs really put pressure on them, and there's tight timelines. And we try to give those players that are high on our list that are kind of stuck in that particular situation as much guidance as we can. But the truth is the end of year junior grades are really admissions wants to see them, and so that becomes a really pivotal part of our timeline. Is after the junior year into the summer before their senior year is when we have a lot more clarity on what their full academic profile by that point looks like. And usually a lot of our commitments come in the summer before their senior year and into their senior year. For high academic Division One schools, that's going to be a little bit that are Division One, maybe a little bit earlier than that. A lot of the Ivy leagues that we compete against earlier than that into the junior year. But that's not to say that they're not committing kids into their senior year as well, because we know that happens. At any rate, I think the biggest thing that advice we can have, and this is just generally, is whatever school you're looking at, is make sure that you understand what those requirements are, and if it matters for someone to get more serious with you, because sometimes it does. Like, all those things have to really line up with a school like ours, whereas there are also other really good schools that it may not be as much of a challenge that way too. And knowing that is helpful, because that means that you might be able to keep a lot of those other schools on the line and then find out from us, and then still be fine with some of those other institutions. So
I don't think there is much to add. Greg, do you have any other recommendations for recruits? It could be both academics or just generally.
Yeah, I would say maybe the other piece going on the recruiting side of things is, as you're familiarizing yourself with the schools academically, do the same athletically too. So please go watch games, watch film. The Final Four is online. If anyone wants to watch any of those games, they're there. But go to a game, during the day, go to a game during the night, go to a conference championship game, go see Division One, Division Two, Division Three, NAIA, JUCO, like whatever the case is. Get a better education on where you may be able to fit in your own personal journey, because that could help you kind of narrow your scope of schools. And your coaches will be able to help you with that from just kind of a college guidance perspective. But it's always helpful to go watch games, particularly the schools that you're interested in, because those coaches, your club coaches, may not know how one school compares to another, or they may not know a school that's 1,000 miles away from them. So do your own homework when it comes to that, and watch as much as you can.
yeah, I would just add one last thing: is try to have at least one person in your support group that's going to give you the hard truth, that's going to give you, like, all right, here's the deal, and then whatever that might be. Because I think it is, when players watch our level, especially when they watch it on video, it does not translate a lot of times to can they play at our level, because video always manipulates a lot of things. It looks a little bit slower, and so on and so on. So seeing us live would be different. Like, they'd have a better feel of that. And so having pump up people that say, like, let's get after it, and you're awesome, got to have those people. But you also have to have that person that's like, listen, that could be your dream school, but, and I'm not talking just about Hopkins, but just generally, that could be your dream school, but let's make sure that you've got a couple others in there too. Because if you put all of your emphasis on that and that doesn't work out, you're going to be stuck in a place that's not that comfortable. And we've had conversations like that before, where we are their dream school, and they have put everything on hold for us, despite what we've told them. as, okay, this is going to be hard. Our list is strong and so on. And then we have to finally have like the final, like, it's not going to work, and they're devastated. And not to say that they can't have us or other people as dream schools, but to really have someone else saying, all right, let's shoot for this, but let's also be, if this doesn't come through because of X, Y, or Z, let's have something there that makes a little more sense. Or maybe that dream school is too far away from some element of what they bring. And having someone tell you the hard truth before you go through all that, as opposed to after, is really helpful.
That was great to end on. And I think this is going to be really eye-opening for everyone listening, and just a wealth of information into the recruiting process and what the Hopkins coaching staff is looking for. And I do want my audience to follow up with you guys. I get questions all the time from players who are interested in the program. So, Greg, what is the best way to reach you? I know you have a ton of emails, but you do get to all of them. So we're going to just add some more. So where can
Yeah.
everyone email you?
No, let's do it. Because in the end, we love connecting with people, no matter where they are, where they're from. It's a really cool part of our job to just talk to a lot of people. The easiest way is Hopkins Soccer, all one word, Hopkins Soccer at jhu.edu. And also, obviously, follow the socials. We're most active on Instagram. That's where we put out a lot of the info on, tournaments we're attending or camps we'll be attending, things like that. That is kind of the most recruiting targeted platform that we do use. So I'd say between those two, those would be your best avenues.
And I
Perfect.
can I put one last plug in? So
Yes, please.
June 12th and 13th, Southern California, in Torrance, California. June 15th and 16th in Palo Alto, California. And then July 13th through the 16th, you can do 2 days or 4. That's the Homewood camp. So that's our big camp. That includes, and we'll have 6 other colleges here, several NESCAC schools, other high academic schools, a really good collection of schools that maybe of interest to a lot of people. So those are the settings, at least for the summer, that we're starting to get. And those, I tell you, those camps sell out. So if you want to do it, plan ahead, and hopefully we can see some of you guys there too.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually going to include the links to everything in the caption below, as well as the Hopkins Soccer email where you can contact them directly. Guys, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And I'm just so happy to see the program doing so well. And I really look forward to watching next season. So thank you again.